So now that we've learned how to navigate through Autodesk Inventor, I want to try to create a new part file. So the first thing I want you to do is make sure you are in your Shapes project folder. And then I want you to go over here to your New button and select Standard Part. And once you've selected it, go ahead and hit Create. And once the file is open, the first thing I want you to do is go to Start New Sketch. And I want to go ahead and start on the XY plane, or the front plane. And then the first thing I want you to do is I want you to draw a rectangle. So let's click on our rectangle tool. So let's click and let go, drag, and then click again. And then to exit my rectangle tool, I can either right click and hit OK or cancel, or I can go to my keyboard and hit the escape button. And now I should be able to edit my rectangle. I can move it around wherever I want. Now, notice that these lines are sort of this purplish blue color. The colors of your geometry in Autodesk Inventor are actually really important. What it tells you is whether or not it is fully constrained. Now, it is proper practice when you are 3D modeling to fully constrain your sketches, meaning you tell your geometry what size it's going to be and where it is going to be located. And so let's go ahead and learn how to do that. You'll notice that it says it has 4 dimensions that this rectangle needs at the bottom right corner. What that means is I can change its size in the X direction, and I can change its size in the Y direction, and I can also move this rectangle in the X and Y direction as well. And so those are my 4 missing dimensions. So look up here in your constraint panel in your ribbon and hover over your constraints. I want you to hover over this top left one. It's called the coincident constraint. And what the coincident constraint basically does is it tells 2 points to be the same point. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. And then I'm going to click on the bottom left corner of my rectangle and the origin. And that will tell these 2 points to be the same point. You'll look and see what happened. It made 2 of my lines black. This is because when lines and shapes change color in Autodesk, it means they are constrained or stuck in some way. Both of these black lines are stuck to the origin, but both of these purple lines can still move. And notice here at the bottom right, it now says you have 2 dimensions needed instead of 4. Well, these 2 purple lines represent the other 2 missing dimensions. And so let's finish constraining the sketch. Let's add those last 2 dimensions. And to add the next dimensions, what I want to do is I want to click on my dimension tool in my constraints panel. And I'm going to click on the top of this rectangle and the bottom of this rectangle. And I'm going to click and I'm going to type in a dimension of 1.5 on my keyboard. And I'm going to hit enter. And it looks like we lost this shape. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out a little bit using my scroll wheel. And I'm going to drag it around by clicking in my scroll wheel. You can also just hit your front button to center it back. And you can see I turned a 3rd line black. And so I'm going to exit my dimension tool real quick. I'm going to hit right click and OK. And it makes sense that one of my lines turned black because now I can't change its height. This rectangle is stuck at a height of 1.5 inches. And one line is still purple because I can still change its width. I can still change the size of this rectangle in the X direction, which is why it still says I have 1 dimension needed. And so to finish fully constraining the sketch, I'm going to go ahead and hit dimension, and I'm going to measure between this left side and this right side, and I'm going to drag my mouse up and click and type in 1.5 as well to make it a perfect square. And this square is fully constrained. You can tell by the color of the lines and the fact that it says fully constrained in the bottom right. So we are ready to finish this sketch. I'm going to hit my home button to center the shape, and then I'm going to hit the extrude button. Now I can drag this cube either forward or back. I'm going to go ahead and drag it forward, and I'm going to type in a distance of 1.5 inches to make it a perfect cube. And then I'm going to hit the home button on my view cube again to center my cube. And so let's actually add some features to this cube. And to do that, I actually want to start a new sketch on the top face of this cube. And there's a couple of ways to do it, but the first thing I want you to try is right-clicking on the cube and then going down to New Sketch. And you'll notice now I'm looking at the top of my cube as opposed to the isometric view. And if your top view is sideways, do me a favor and go ahead and rotate it so that you're reading top, left to right. And I'm going to sketch on the top face of this cube. And so I'm going to go over here to my circle tool, and I'm going to click somewhere in the middle of this cube. I'm I'm going to let go of click, I'm going to drag, and I'm going to be sure not to click again. You'll notice that it's asking for a dimension. I can add that dimension just by typing in a number. I'm going to type in 1 to make this circle 1 inch and then hit enter. And then I'm going to hit escape on my keyboard, or I could right click and hit OK to get out of my circle tool. And you'll notice that the circle is still blue. And of course it's still blue. I can still move it around. I still have 2 dimensions needed. I can move the circle in the X direction, that's 1 dimension, and I can still move it in the Y direction. That's 2 dimensions. But I can't change the size of the circle. It is stuck at a diameter of 1 inch. So I want to fully constrain this sketch, and I actually want to lock this circle directly in the center of this square. And so to do this, I'm going to click on my dimension tool. And I'm going to click on the center of the circle and the left side of my cube. And I'm going to drag it out and click again. And I'm going to tell it to be halfway across this cube. And so if you don't know how to figure out what would be half of this cube, that's fine. Autodesk Inventor will actually do the math for you. All you have to do is type in what is the total width of your cube, 1.5, and then type divided by 2. And then hit enter, and it'll do the math for you. It turns out half of that is 0.75. And so now you'll see there's only 1 dimension needed left in this sketch. And so I'm going to right click and hit OK, or I could hit escape on my keyboard to get out of my dimensioning tool, and I'm going to play with the circle for a second. I want to see exactly what it means. If I click on the center of the circle, you'll see that I can still move it in the up and down direction, in the Y direction, but I can't move it in the X direction, and I can't change its size. That's the 1 dimension needed left. And so let's fix that. Let's give this its last dimension. I'm going to tell it can't go in the Y direction anymore. So I'm going to click on the bottom of my cube, and then I'm going to click on the center of my circle, and I'm going to drag it out and click again. And I could type 1.5 divided by 2 again, or I could just type in 0.75 since Autodesk has already figured it out for me, and hit enter. And you'll notice the entire geometry is black now. And it says it's fully constrained in the bottom. So with that, I'm going to finish my sketch, and I'm going to hit the extrude button. And I'll zoom out a little bit so I can see what's going on. And you'll see it wants to extrude upwards 1.5 because that's what it was the last time. And I could extrude it upwards. I'm going to click on this orange arrow here and drag it, or I can extrude it in the other direction. You can see that it's turned into what we call a cut. And so if you want to see what the difference between a join and a cut is, if you look over here, you can see you have a join or a cut. What does a join do? A join adds to your shape. And so if I click on this orange arrow and I drag it up, you can see it turns into a join. If I click on this orange arrow and drag it down, you can see it becomes a cut. And so I want it to be a cut. I want to cut a hole through this cube. Instead of typing in a distance for it to go, I'm going to click on this feature right here that says through all. And so what this does is it cuts the circle all the way through my shape, making a complete hole in my cube. And I'm going to hit OK. And actually, this is probably a pretty good place to stop and save our work so we don't have to start over if Autodesk Inventor accidentally crashes. So how do we do that? Well, we go to File, Save As, and we will call this shape Holey Cube and hit Save. And as you work, it's a good idea to save early and save often. So every time you add an extra feature, make sure you go up here and hit this Save button. And let's actually practice that again. I want to start a new sketch on this front face of this cube. And so we could right click and go to New Sketch again, or we could click Start New Sketch and select this front face. And so now I want to go ahead and grab my circle tool again. And this time I want to put my circle down without adding a dimension. And so I'm just going to click on my face, drag, and then click again. And then I'm going to exit my circle tool and right click and hit OK. And so now it says I have 3 dimensions needed. I can change the size of the circle, that's one of my dimensions. I can move this circle in the X direction, and I can move this circle in the Y direction. And so those are the 3 dimensions needed, is 2 location dimensions and a size dimension. But for the record, you don't have to fully dimension a sketch to extrude it. So for example, I can hit Finish Sketch and hit Extrude, and I can do things to this circle, but again, it's proper practice to see a fully constrained sketch. And you can even check to see if a sketch is fully constrained after you've used it for an extrusion. I can open up my extrusion and hover over the sketch, and it'll give you a little message that says fully constrained. I can do the same thing with my sketch 2 for my second extrusion. You can see that it's fully constrained. And so I want to go back into my sketch 3 if you left it. Don't start a new sketch. That'll cause all sorts of problems. I'm going to right click on sketch 3 and go down to edit sketch. And so I'm going to go ahead and add a dimension to this circle. And this time I think I want to make the diameter 1.2 inches. And then I'm going to right click and hit OK. And it's okay if your circle moved around outside your square. All you have to do is click on the center and move it back somewhere in the middle. But as you can see, the circle is still not fully constrained. It's still not black, and it still says there are 2 dimensions needed. I can still move it in the X direction, and I can still move it in the Y direction. So let's go ahead and add those constraints. And this time, instead of using the dimension tool, I want to show you a different way to fully constrain this circle. And so I want to go up here to my Create panel in my ribbon and click on Point. And I want to add a point along the center of this edge of this square. And so if you hover along the line, you'll see it magnetizes to the line. And when you find the center, you'll see that the dot turns green. When it does, you click. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing along this edge. I'm going to hover down the line, and when it turns green, I know I'm at the center of my edge, and I'm going to click. And then I'm going to right click and hit OK. And I'm going to constrain this circle to these 2 points. And to do that, I'm going to go up here to my constraints, and I'm going to find my vertical constraint, which makes my geometry vertical. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to select the center of this circle and this center point on my edge right here. And so what that does is it tells these 2 points to always be vertical with each other. So if I right click and hit OK, we can look at what that means. If I click on my circle now, I can drag it up and down. It's either always above or below this other point that I just constrained it to. But I cannot move it left or right. And if I look down here, you can see it still says there's 1 dimension needed. So let's get rid of that last dimension. And we're going to do something similar, but this time we're going to find our horizontal constraint. And so I'm going to click on my point and my edge, and you'll see that it's now fully constrained and my circle turned completely black. So I'm going to right click and hit OK, and I'm going to finish my sketch. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit extrude, and I'm going to change it from a join to a cut. And I could type in a distance, or I could drag it, but I'm going to go ahead and select through all to make sure it always goes through my shape, even if I change the original depth of my cube. And I'm going to hit OK. And let's try to make one more hole, and this time I don't want to do just a plain circle like I did before. I think this time let's click on this face. I want to right click and go down to New Sketch. This time I think I want to draw a smiley face, and I strongly recommend you stop and watch me do it, because in a minute I'm going to have you draw your own thing. And you can draw a smiley face if you want to, or you can pick something else out. But I'm going to pick my line tool. I'm going to be very careful not to lock onto any geometry that pops up behind it. And I'm going to find a spot. I'm going to click, drag down, and click again. And then I'm going to hit escape on my keyboard and select my line tool again. And I'm going to do it again on the other side. I'm going to click, drag, and click again, hit escape. And then I'm going to find my 3-point arc tool. And I'm going to click over here to the left side, go over here to the right side, and then I'm going to drag it down right here. And then I'm going to finish my sketch and try to extrude. And you'll notice I cannot extrude anything. And you might wonder why, and the answer is kind of obvious. I didn't actually draw any shapes. Autodesk doesn't know how to extrude lines. So I'm going to go back into the sketch, and it's very important that you don't start another new sketch, but you edit the old sketch. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to add to this shape here. So I'm going to select the line tool, and I'm going to add to that top left line first. And I want to make sure I get that green dot. I'm going to click and drag. And then I'm going to click down and drag, and then I'm going to click in and drag and make sure I get that green dot. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Get that green dot, click and drag, and then finish off that shape. And I'm going to hit escape, and then I'm going to select my line tool again. I want to draw some lines that come in just a little bit. So I'll draw that one, and then I'll hit escape and grab my line tool again so I can draw it on the other side and bring it in. And then I'm going to find my arc tool, and I'm going to connect that in as well. So green dot, and then drag it in. And I'm not going to stress about fully constraining the shape because this is just a fun little design. I'm just going to finish my sketch now, and try to extrude it again. And so you'll notice that I can extrude two of the shapes, but I can't extrude this third shape over here. And you might wonder why, but the answer is kind of obvious. I never actually finished this last shape. So let me go back and hit cancel. And let's go back in and edit this sketch one more time. And I want to make sure I get those last two dots together. I'm going to go to my coincident constraint and tell these 2 points to be the same point. And then one more time, I will finish my sketch, and I will extrude all 3 of these faces. I want to turn it into a cut, and I want to tell it to go all the way through. And then hit OK. And I encourage you to pick your own design for that third hole. You can do a smiley face or some other kind of emoji or just your initials or whatever you want. So play around with it, make it unique, make it your own. But once you're done with it, make sure you hit the Save button to update your Holey Cube document. And we are done with this shape.